Welcome, everybody, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And a special thank you to our two guests, Geoff Ginsburg from Bunker Hill Community College and Cheryl Warner from Northwood University. They're going to be introducing themselves in just a moment. So I'd like to introduce ourselves, Accelerant, and talk a little bit about why we're here today. Accelerant is a software solutions company that builds and implements budget software for the college and university market as well as for companies and nonprofits. A large portion of our business is actually in higher education, where we really help our clients generate a culture of budget accountability that includes their department heads. And because we have such a large list of college and university clients, we've seen firsthand the types of pressures that finance professionals in those colleges and universities are under today. You know, there's greater scrutiny than ever before on budgets and the whole process of developing a budget. And that's because in many colleges and universities, the need for financial aid is rising while grants, endowments, and even enrollments are down. And yet, even as budgeting has become mission critical in higher ed, people still fall back a lot on Excel for budgeting. So we want to introduce you today to a couple of people that have found a better way and partnered with Accelerant to improve budgeting in their college or university. So with that, let me introduce Geoff Ginsburg and Cheryl Warner. And Geoff, why don't we start with you? Can you tell the folks listening about yourself, and when you do that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you think about or approach your job?
Sure. My name is Geoff Ginsburg. I'm the budget director at Bunker Hill Community College. I've been the budget director for about 11 years now, and before that I was a budget analyst in the governor's budget office for the state of Massachusetts. And then prior to that, I was an analyst in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. So I may not have as much experience in budgeting as some of you, but I have about 12, 13, 14 years of experience. I guess my approach to budgeting is just KISS. Just keep it simple. You know, I try to help my budget managers along the way. You know, I don't want to hold their hands if I don't have to, but I will. I want their budgeting process to be as successful, will work itself out.
Sounds good. And Cheryl, what about you?
Well, I am the budget director. I'm also in charge of the accounting services here. I've been doing budgeting about since '85, so a very long time. My philosophy is I like an honest budget. So I work very hard with my budget managers to create an honest budget. I've been doing this for a long time, so I've seen every game there is to see. And I like to keep that out of our budgets.
And Cheryl, what can you tell us about Northwood University, just to scope out your university, number of employees, number of locations, your ERP system, that type of thing?
Sure. We have 3 campuses. We're kind of a unique college. We're not all that large, but we're unique. We have 3 campuses, one in Michigan, Florida, and Texas. Those are residential campuses. Between the 3, we have about 2,500 residential students. We have a growing graduate program with about 400 learners now, and a really dynamic adult learning program with about 1,500 students. So we have about an additional 12 to 15 sites around the country, and we also have a growing international presence throughout in multiple countries. We have about 110 budget managers throughout the system. We have about 500 employees, and we're running a budget of between 70 and 75 million.
And Geoff, what about you?
We're an urban community college in the Charlestown section of Boston. We have about 13,000 students, so we have high enrollment, but we really have a small campus. We do have another campus, but it's really necessarily another campus. We also do have a few satellite sites at some local high schools. We have about a $60 million budget. We, too, have a real high population of international students from 90-plus countries. We have about 40 budget managers. We use Datatel as our financial system. That's Bunker Hill in a nutshell.
Well, another interesting point about Bunker Hill that I know is that you folks actually were profiled in the New York Times a while ago for kind of an interesting approach you've taken to your evening programs. I guess you're running some evening programs late at night.
Yeah, I mean, with enrollment added a number of what we call midnight classes that basically run from about 11:30 at night till about 2 in the morning. So those are becoming increasingly popular. And, a lot of the people that take those classes are taking it because that's the only time that they can take a class. They might have a late shift at work, and so it's convenient for them. So it's a growing part of our college.
Every college is under some form of pressure these days, whether it's shrinking endowments or cuts to state funding. What would you say are the specific pressure points for Bunker Hill?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously, we're a public community college, so we rely heavily on state funding. And over the last few years, things have not been great. We've had our state funding cut. We did have federal stimulus money the last couple of years, but that's dried up. So, we have to figure out ways to compensate for that. We have other issues, and where sort of sustainability is kind of the catchphrase across the country. So we're committed to it. We're one of the members, signatories of the American President's climate commitment. And so we're doing a lot of things with sustainability, and that costs money. So finding money and keeping costs to our students low is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. So how do you see the budget process as helping to address those challenges?
It makes budget managers think more about what it is that they're budgeting for. I feel like in the past, it's with a spreadsheet, it's they just put numbers in, and there's no real thought as to why those numbers are the way they are, or what is that going to buy. But I think now, with money being as tight as it is, budget managers are putting a lot more thought into their budgets, and I think a product like Budget Pack is certainly a great tool for that. It's a database, so our managers are this is about our 5th year using the product now, so our managers are almost experts at it, and I pretty much get the information that I'm looking for without having to ask. So we're really well on our way, but I think it definitely makes the process more effective and more efficient.
And Cheryl, how would you answer that? What are the key pressure points facing Northwood today, and do you see the budget process as helping to meet those challenges?
We are a private institution, so enrollment is critical to us. We are definitely enrollment driven. And we implemented a new strategic plan at about the same time the economy started to tank, and we were trying to improve the profile of our students. So, we switched from terms to semesters at the same time. So we've suffered some enrollment hits. We're, struggling to make our enrollment because of these changes, which we intended to a large part. So that is a pressure point. And we had interestingly enough, we had an all-college meeting yesterday, and the president, the word he kept using was nimble, and I think this is really appropriate to what we're doing. We needed a tool that helped us be nimble. The budget is critical, and when we contract some changes in enrollment, we need to be nimble enough to change the budget. So that was really important to us.
And so is it fair to say for both of you that the budget process is a mission-critical process?
Absolutely. When you're, 90-some% of your revenue is enrollment-driven, forecasting, producing an accurate budget is critical.
I'd agree. It's a huge part of our process as well.
And Geoff, while we're on you for a second, Could you briefly describe the budget process in the old world, the way that things used to be done?
Well, basically, I would put together an Excel workbook, and I would email all the managers an Excel, an Excel spreadsheet, and I'd have all the information already populated, and ask them to pretty much just fill in what their budget is and put some comments. And so that, I mean, basically, I would get 4 or 5 versions from each person over the course of a month. So it was really just basically an Excel-driven process.
And what about you, Cheryl?
Same process, but I had a lot more than Jeff had. We have I did 110 templates, and I tried to give them some historical data, some instructions. We tried to manage the head count within an Excel workbook. It was a nightmare.
So both of you then were using Excel.
Correct.
As kind of the primary budgeting tool. Okay. So what we'd like to do is actually launch a poll just to kind of make this interactive with the folks on the phone. So we're sharing the results now. About 65% of the folks on the line are using Excel today, and it looks like the runner-up here is the ERP budget module. Geoff, Cheryl, do these poll results surprise you at all?
Not at all. We're a colleague shop as well, and we used a colleague for several years, but we didn't roll it out to users. So between Excel and the ERP, that makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. No. Cheryl, maybe starting with you, what were the biggest complaints about the budget process that you personally had, and what were the biggest complaints that you heard from others, from the users?
Well, my biggest complaint was they never knew how to use it. I mean, we have 110 people, and I bet 108 of them never use Excel, except for once a year. So that was my biggest complaint. They were constantly breaking the formulas or changing things. They would rename the file instead of just leaving it where I had it. And I never felt comfortable about what I missed because it was harder to proof it when it was in 110 different places. Mm-hmm. So those were my biggest problems. Their biggest problems were they ignored it till the very end. They never did it till it was almost due, and like Jeff said, they just plugged in numbers. They didn't really give it much thought because it was isolated.
In the old world, did people try to change the budget templates that you sent them? Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think they did?
Well, I think they thought that they were helping me in a lot of cases. They thought, well, if I just add this line in, then she can give me this new account number, or I'm going to total it differently, or I want to check my something, and they would just change things. I don't think that they were doing it to make things more complicated.
Okay.
But they really weren't experts at Excel, so.
And Jeff, same question for you. What were the biggest complaints that you personally felt and that you heard from others?
For me personally, I mean, pretty much, what Cheryl said, I agree with, except obviously on a smaller scale. For me personally, it was just the numerous versions of Excel. Somebody emailing me a new version but not telling me what the change was, so I'd have to look through the whole thing to figure out, well, how is this different than the last version? Definitely the people did change formulas, and I think some people, just like Cheryl said, didn't necessarily know what they were doing. I think others were a little more savvy, were trying to improve their budget position a little bit. I think they knew what they were doing. So, in terms of other people's complaints, to be honest with you, people just complained about having to do the budget. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily that it was an Excel spreadsheet or what. I don't think that helps, obviously, but it was, people are very, very busy, and, take a dean of a major area who's got a million duties and then have that person have to do the budget. It's the last thing that they think about, even though it probably shouldn't be. But that's basically my experience with it.
So we want to run another pulse survey here just to get a sense of the folks who are listening in. What are the common complaints that you hear? So here are the results. It looks like really number one here is the budget templates don't let me budget the way that I think, which is very interesting, followed closely by the process itself is just too complex. Geoff, Cheryl, I'd like you to react to this. What do you think?
I mean, I'm a little bit surprised just because my experience is a little different. I mean, I've never received the complaint that the templates don't let them budget the way they think, but it doesn't mean that that's not the case. It's just I just never, people don't complain about those things to me. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little eye-opening.
Yeah, it surprises me too, because I think if I would have picked any of them, it would have been I do not recognize the final budget. And because it was an Excel that they emailed to me, they didn't really have a resource to go back and look and see that, yeah, that was your number. I don't change anything. But that's the one I think I would have picked. So it is kind of surprising.
Well, you know, I'm wondering if part of what's behind this is something that we just talked about, which is if people are trying to change your budget template, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because for some reason, they don't think that way.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So, well, thank you everybody for your input on that. You know, I think a lot of people think about improving their budget process, but both of you stopped thinking about it and you actually did something about it. So what ultimately prompted you to say, you know, now's the time. Let's stop talking about it and actually do something about it. Cheryl, why don't we let you start on that?
Well, I had a change agent in our midst. We got a new CFO, and he had been through a couple of iterations of the budget, and he saw how complicated and cumbersome it was. And he was used to a system where it was pencils down at 5 o'clock, we have a budget at 6. Although I told him that was, you know, never going to happen in our world. But he decided that it was time to speed it up, and I agreed. You know, compiling 110 templates took a long time, better than a month. So we just knew it was time to make a change. He, like I said, he saw a couple of those budget cycles and said, that's enough. We've got to do something different.
And Geoff?
Well, when I first started here, my boss, the CFO, and the president of the college had only been here for a couple of years. So I think it was an opportunity for me to come in and kind of change the way things were going. And I don't think there was really the process before me, I think, was even, you know, more complicated than the way I had it. So my boss had a lot of faith and trust in me, and it wasn't a formal process, but it was just after a few years of monkeying with these spreadsheets and trying to make them work as best as possible, I just finally said that it's time to, you know, I need to really kind of look out there. And, you know, even coming across Budget Pack was sort of by accident, which we could talk about that later, but it wasn't like I wasn't actively looking. So that's kind of how it went here.
And Cheryl, was that true for you too, that you weren't actively looking for a budget solution? There was no formal initiative underway before that?
Right, we were not looking. We were talking about ways to improve it, and we knew we needed to do that, but we were not actively looking for to purchase some kind of solution. We were actually just noodling it in-house. Right.
So, you know, if there wasn't a formal project underway and no formal funding set aside either, you obviously had to win the support of some key people to make changes. So how did you go about winning the support of the people that you needed to win the support of? Cheryl, why don't we start with you?
I think it was easier than I had really anticipated. We have, because it's a software, because we bought a software, we have an IT executive committee who reviews all technology purchases. And Carl, my CFO, sits on that committee, as does our IT director. The CFO had seen the webinar, and he bought in easily. And we brought the IT director in, showed him the software, and those two pretty much, I went with them to the committee meeting, and it was an easy sell. It really was.
And Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, I'd say it was similar. It was kind of an easy sell for me. I mean, you and I spoke for a few months about this, and that was, towards the end of our fiscal year, and you came in and gave us a demo, and my boss was there, and he loved it. Everybody, all the budget managers were there. They all loved it, and so I really had the buy-in from everybody at the college. And because it was at the end of the fiscal year, it allowed me to budget for this for the next fiscal year. So I didn't necessarily have to, find money somewhere. I mean, I kind of did, obviously, for budgeting purposes, but I didn't have to pull it out of some other pot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Cheryl.
All of the people on the committee are budget managers, so they knew what they were up against. They knew the alternative, so that made it easier to sell as well.
So it doesn't seem like either one of you had some huge stumbling block there, but did you have any stumbling blocks, and if so, what were they?
The only stumbling block for us would be, I guess, just the concern of our IT department, which, that was quickly, shut down. I mean, it was nothing. Once our IT director and their staff saw what it was, they were not concerned with implementation or maintenance or anything. So that was just the initial kind of concern, but that was, again, shut down pretty quick.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Cheryl, go on.
That was our experience as well. The IT director is a budget manager, so when he saw the front end side of it, he loved it. He thought that was great, but he was still reluctant because he didn't have the resources to provide a lot of support. So once they found out they had no support, they had minimal, we needed them minimally, then that was our biggest stumbling block. Once they bought in, it was full steam ahead.
Well, on that note, why don't we do a poll survey here of the folks listening in to find out what are the stumbling blocks that they perceive. So let's share these results. It looks like the bulk of the objections here are right in the middle. The limited IT, limited funds, maybe some competing priorities. Jeff, Cheryl, what do you think? Do these look recognizable?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Obviously, funding is an issue. The IT resources can be an issue, and even for us, we had Colleague, we had Datatel, and Datatel has a budget management module in it, and it's something that we looked at. It was never set up here before I got here, and just we looked at implementing that as an alternative, and it just the cons outweighed the pros, and for Budget Pack, the pros way outweighed any cons, so it was kind of a no-brainer. So yeah, these I'm not surprised by these.
Those were exactly what we were up against when we started. Money obviously was the first one, and like I said, when you get those users in there and they see it, the competing priorities kind of fell away. We just made room for both, and IT ended up not being an issue. So those are exactly the concerns that we would have had at the outset.
And Cheryl, maybe that segues kind of nicely into this next question. When you were looking at budgeting solutions, and I think you shared with me that you've been to various seminars and conferences and things like that, and so you'd certainly seen budgeting applications over the years. But when you were looking at budgeting solutions, how important were your end users, the department heads, in your decision making? And how would you sort of characterize the typical department head budget person at Northwood and then Jeff at Bunker Hill?
Well, obviously we've got all kinds of budget managers around here, from coaches to librarians to academicians, so different levels of knowledge and some of the things we were asking them to do. And because we had used both Excel and Colleague for our budgeting tool, I wasn't concerned with how I was going to get the budget together. I knew I would do it no matter what tool we were using. So my focus was the end user, knowing that they avoided doing the budgets, but they didn't want to do them. And so I wanted to make it as easy for my end user as I could, and make it theirs. One of the problems we've always had with Excel is they were never accountable. They just didn't feel like they owned that data. They just plugged some numbers in to complete a task. On the other hand, the CFO was all about the end result, getting that budget compiled and having access to it at an officer level quickly. So we had different focuses and ended up at the same place.
And Jeff, same question for you. How important were those end users to you, and how would you sort of describe a typical department head at Bunker Hill?
Well, the end users were extremely important. I had to get their buy-in. I didn't want to purchase a product and throw it at them and say, okay, here you go. It was something that, I wanted them to check out, see the demo, tell me what they liked, what they didn't like. So when you came and gave us a demo, I had all our budget managers there. And as you know, obviously it was nothing but good things that people had to say. So it was important to get them on board. I didn't, I needed their support. I just didn't want to have another situation where, it's just similar to the Excel spreadsheet where people just, they're not really putting any effort into the budget and they don't want to do it and blah, blah, blah. So, so it was definitely important. The typical manager here, budget manager or just manager, they're very non-technical, just sort of into their own kind of area. If you're the Dean of Arts and Sciences, you're focused on that and you're not really focused on budgeting. And, while you may use an Excel spreadsheet, you don't really know the intricacies of it, and you're not really used to, you do this once a year, so it's not something that you've practiced a lot, and it doesn't come second nature to you. So that's pretty much, I'd say, 99% of our budget managers.
Yeah, in looking at a new system, what was more important to you, having more financial control or end-user flexibility, or both?
Well, really both, but, selfishly, I wanted more control of the process. So budget packs definitely gave me control. There's no question about it. We got the flexibility from the end user that they wanted, so that was a bonus. And again, it was something that was very easy for them to use. So they did things the right way. They did it more efficiently, more accurately, and I had better control over the whole process.
Cheryl, anything to add to that?
I couldn't have said it better. That is exactly our experience.
Okay. And Cheryl, if you could maybe just list the primary goals or objectives that you had in improving your budget process, even forgetting about technology, just your goals in improving the process, what were they?
We certainly wanted to speed up the process. That was a goal. We were in the midst of changing our fiscal year, and so the timing of how we were going to do our budget was changing, and we needed to have it compiled a lot quicker. We did not feel that our budget managers were felt like they had ownership in the budget, so we wanted to give them a tool where they could manage it a little bit, manage it a lot better, that they could own it, that they knew those numbers, they knew where they came from, and they just didn't plug numbers because they were asked to. I think those were the biggest goals.
Jeff, would you have would you say you had similar goals or
Yeah,
anything different?
Absolutely agree with Cheryl. The same exact goals that we had here, and one other thing that we thought about was the accuracy of the budget. Is it something that Budget Pack says you're going to get a more accurate budget? Is that really true, or is that so? That was actually a goal that we looked at, and we did get a much more accurate budget. I was a little skeptical about that at first, but every year that we've used BudgetPack, we've gotten better at it, and we've had a more accurate budget. And this year, you know, I was telling you the other day that we actually came within less than 0.5% of our budget. So on a $60 million budget, I thought that was, you know, pretty accurate.
Geoff, since we're on the topic, if we kind of fast forward from looking behind to the after picture, what do you feel are the most significant changes made to the budget process, and what benefits have you seen? I think you just touched on one, which was improved accuracy, but what were the key changes made?
Well, I say the two key changes are definitely the accuracy and the efficiency. Yeah, like Cheryl said before, it's a shorter process. People don't have to ask as many questions. Everything is very straightforward and, you know, step-by-step process on doing it. So it's definitely a more efficient, quicker process.
And Cheryl, what about you? What do you think are the most significant changes made to your budget process?
I agree with Geoff. I think that both of those things, accuracy, we're looking forward to since we're in our first cycle, but even just being almost a quarter into the first time we've used it, I think we're closer. We don't have as many timing issues, so we have a much better accuracy on our budget. I think they own it. You know, we're, like I said, we're 3 months into the first cycle. We implemented the first budget that we produced in BudgetPack, and my budget managers still go in there and look at things. Now, how did I do that? Why did I do it like that? So they use the tool even into the fiscal year. So it's not like Excel in that they're only doing it one time a year. They're in it frequently.
I just want to add on to that, too, is, you know, I always check, every day I check the users and the configuration of BudgetPack, and you can see who logs in and when they log in. And I agree with you, yeah, I see people logging in every day.
Yeah, they own it now.
Yep.
It's theirs.
So what's been the feedback that you've heard from your department heads or other people involved in the process? Did you get any letters, any thank yous?
I did, and the CFO did. More importantly, the CFO did. With 110 users, we did not get one complaint. I had one librarian that signed up for training twice because she was a little nervous, and she didn't even need it. So they all love it. It's very intuitive. They have amazed me in some of the problem-solving things that they've done within BudgetPack.
I got a few emails, nothing, you know, not a lot, but I had a lot of positive feedback after the initial demo. So people were already sort of on board, and when they started using it, they were, yeah, nothing negative to say. Everything was easy for them, and nothing but positive feedback for us.
Can I add to that? We demoed it with we picked about 15 budget managers to demo it throughout the country. They weren't just all located on one campus, and we kind of used them as champions to go back to their campuses, their locations, because they were all totally on board. They were quick to pick it up. And that was a good move on our part. It really helped, I think.
Can you take maybe a couple of minutes, Cheryl, and talk about what was involved in implementation?
I had to provide a few files to the Accelerant staff, and they had everything ready. They did all the heavy lifting and got all the files loaded and sent. We put, I can't remember if we put 2 or 3 years worth of data in there so that our budget managers had lots of access. And Accelerant had all that set up and loaded, and when it got to me, I did a few changes of the way I wanted things to look, which was very simple, and we rolled it out. It was a very quick and painless process.
Geoff, anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, it was very similar for us. It was about a 3-week process. You guys did all the work.
All the work.
You know, yeah, I gave you a few files, and which, you know, didn't take me very long to put together. So, yeah, and just when you got it back to, well, first of all, I was surprised at how quickly you got it to us. That was, 3 weeks, all that information was very impressive. And, our IT department had very minimal involvement. So just like Cheryl, I mean, it's a very similar experience.
Okay. Yeah, I want to move on to some specific questions for each of you, but I do want to double back on one area. I think you both mentioned that there have been some efficiency gains here. Things are being done faster and easier. But there's also, in terms of budgeting, the whole effectiveness side of the equation, improving communication in the process, improving the actual decision-making in the process. So what can you tell us about the after picture in terms of communication, improved decision making? Geoff, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the improved communication is basically the fact that the budget managers have a place to put all the detail that they need regarding their budget in Budget Pack, as opposed to a small little Excel cell that obviously you can change the size, but Excel Budget Pack is a database, so it has all that information in it. So for me, I could see that information. I wouldn't, when we met on the budget, I would meet, with all of our budget managers, and I'd have less questions to ask them because they provided me with most of the information that I already had. Less emails back and forth about versions and whatnot. So communication, I think, was more streamlined.
I would agree. And our officers had access quicker than they ever did before. They don't get overly involved in the process, but they can get at it now. I was telling Larry the other day about a scenario where I was off because my daughter had a baby, and I was off taking care of her 2-year-old, and we had some enrollment changes, and we had a provost that needed to get to his budget so he could get to the budget managers and start working out a revision. They didn't need me. They did it. He had access. He could go in and do it on his own. And so it's a lot quicker. It's a lot more efficient. And it's we clearly communicate better with this tool than we did with Excel.
Well, I tell you what, we have about 15 minutes left, and I would like to see if we can get to a couple of audience questions. So there are some specific questions that we know people ask a lot, and we thought we would cover that here. But let's see if we can kind of get through a lot of these in the remaining time. One question that gets asked a lot just concerns, integration between the general ledger package and the budget package. Geoff, I know you move data a lot between DataTel and Budget Pack. Just maybe you can tell folks, briefly what's involved with that, how long it takes.
Well, first, as long as your system can export to a CSV file or an Excel file, then you're good to go. Basically, I run a query on our general ledger system that takes about 3 minutes to run. Then I upload that data into Budget Pack, which takes another couple minutes, and then that's pretty much it. In terms of just moving data from the GL system to Budget Pack, it's 5, 6, 7 minute process top.
And just sticking with you for a minute, I remember that your department heads didn't necessarily love Excel spreadsheets, and they didn't think strictly in terms of columns and rows type budget templates. Instead, I know Bunker Hill does a lot around something that you call action plans that actually hit multiple general ledger accounts, and you kind of bundle them up. Can you explain what they are and perhaps give a couple of examples of that?
Well, action plans are basically they're basically expansion or new ideas that people have that the president of the college has committed a certain amount of money to. So, you might work in advising and have a plan to expand, your advisors or expand how you do advising. Maybe you want to do some online advising, and so your action plan, which is basically it's tied to our strategic process and our goals. So you can't just submit a plan for anything. It has to be something that's related to the college goals. So certainly advising, obviously, is something that most people have goals that are, revolve around student success and advising. So someone, our advising manager might submit something that's maybe $60,000 or $10,000 or whatever the amount is to have this, online advising software, I guess, could be an example. And so that's an action plan. And if it gets funded, then we put it in. I put that in budget pack under a separate section, and people can easily see it. And so that's kind of how things work with that.
So, and that's how you tie the strategic plan to the budget?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So every 3 years we have a new, we meet to go over some new college goals, and all of your action plans are associated with one of the goals.
Cheryl, you mentioned that your CFO came to Northwood from industry, specifically Sears Kmart. How do you think he approached things differently coming from that type of industry background?
He loved data. He loves data. So he thought we needed to be able to report a lot more than we were reporting. Slice and dice is some of his favorite words. Slice and dice the data. So he was also used to having things quicker. He liked the pencils down approach. Budgets due at 5, we have a report at 6. So he's used to dynamic data, where in higher ed we work with more static stuff. It doesn't change a lot. So it was a good learning experience for all of us, especially those of us that had been in higher ed a long time, because we started to look at things a little bit differently.
And then what was his reaction to the new system?
Well, he liked the fact that we have more control, because with Excel spreadsheets, when they're out there, until they're emailed back to me or saved in a share drive, I don't know who's working on them and who's not. I can look at that now. I can nudge people that haven't gotten into it. I can help them along the way because we can see the same data. So I can work with them on their budgets, and when it's done, I can compile it a whole lot quicker. And that was all of his goals.
So, Cheryl, just sticking with you for a minute, I think one of the unique challenges of Northwood, as you mentioned in your intro, you've got campuses in Michigan, Texas, Florida. So how did you handle training for 100 users spread out across those campuses?
Training was a piece of cake. We scheduled about 6 webinars and let the budget managers just attend from their desks. There is a user's guide that's nice and quick and pretty visual, and people just took to it. It's very intuitive, and my backup was a last-minute add-on. We needed somebody to back me up on Budget Pack, and I gave her the manual, and she dug in on her own and is as good at it as I am. So a very intuitive tool, easy for budget managers.
Geoff, on the community college front, do you think there are any unique budgeting needs related to community colleges?
Well, I think that, I don't know if this is true across the country, but I feel like funding that we receive is, well, in Massachusetts, definitely, public higher education funding is probably 49th or 50th in the country. It's very low. So we don't get a lot of money from the state, and we rely heavily on state funding. So, the fact that we do have such a huge increase in enrollment with such limited space and limited dollars, it's a huge challenge as to how do we serve all these students. The campus that we're on was built in 1973 to accommodate 5,000 students. We have 13,000 students. So we've done a good job, trying to find all the dead space and make it workable. So, but I think, basically the enrollment issues is, I guess it's hard to say that, having so much enrollment is such a problem, because other people, it's the opposite. So, I don't know.
Do you think smaller community colleges have fundamentally similar, the same budgeting challenges that large colleges have? Does size matter?
Yeah, I don't think it matters. I think we all have our own budgeting issues, and whether it's in, space or a lack of funding from the state, or maybe rely heavily on federal grants that have been cut. I mean, I don't think it's much different anywhere else. It's just maybe the small intricacies.
Did you get any surprise benefits, Cheryl? Maybe we'll ask that of you first.
Yeah, there were some surprise benefits. Some of it we're just learning now. I wasn't, like I said earlier, I was very impressed with how the users used it. That was a surprise benefit, and continue to use it. That continues to be a surprise. We're working at using it as a forecasting tool, and the next phase, I want my budget managers to be able to forecast. I've always done all the forecasting. I want them, because now they own their budget, I want them to start forecasting, and I think that was kind of a surprise at how well they used it, and we can ask more out of them. And we're also going to start trying to use it as our reporting tool. We don't use Colleague as our reporting tool. I write queries that download it into Excel, and we write reports from that. And I think that because I do load everything into Budget Pack every month, we can use it and write some reports that budget managers can log in and use.
Jeff, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I had mentioned earlier about budget accuracy. I mean, to me, that was a big surprise. I didn't think that we would necessarily realize such an accurate budget through this process, but we have. So it's a pleasant surprise.
And just to wrap up, we've got about another 5 minutes here, so we'll sort of do this rapidly and see if we can get to a couple of questions. But Cheryl, I'm almost embarrassed to ask this, because this is really not supposed to be a commercial, but you did say at one point this was the best purchase decision you ever made. Do you still feel that way, and do you care to elaborate on that?
I do. I have championed many projects in my years, our purchasing card program, a printing program, office supply programs, and I have gotten so much, unbelievably, I have gotten so much pushback from all of these programs that every time I do one, I say, I am never going to champion anything ever again, even if it is in the best interest of the school. And yet there I went down this road again with Budget Pack, and it was accepted so well. It was the best decision, the best purchase I ever championed.
Jeff, anything to add to that?
I agree 100%. Definitely one of the best purchases we've ever made, or I've ever made here. I can't say enough good things about it, to be honest with you. So I don't want to keep rambling about all the good things.
Well, listen, just to wrap up quickly, if you had one piece of advice to offer people, what would it be? Cheryl, why don't we start with you?
My mind went back thinking about the Excel templates that we used to use and how awful it was, and all I thought is garbage in, garbage out, and if there's a way to reduce that, do it. It just makes life so much easier.
And Jeff, what about you?
My advice would be to buy this product.
Yeah.
I've looked at other products, not a lot, but I've looked at one or two other products, and this just has such a nice fit. It does what you want it to do, no more, no less. It's a really great product, and don't overlook it.
Okay. Is there any question that you'd like to ask one another?
I think I've gotten to know Jeff pretty well in the last couple of phone calls.
I guess the question that I would have is, how did you manage to stay at the same place for so long?
I don't live in a big city like Boston. I live in a small town.
Okay. It's a good answer.
All right, fair enough. Well, listen, what we're going to do now that we're kind of near the top of the hour is we're going to launch our last poll because we always like to get feedback on webinars like this. We're going to launch that. And at the same time, we have actually gotten some pretty good questions in from the people listening today. So we'll launch the poll now just so that people can give us some feedback. But let me quickly take a look and scan some of these questions. One of the questions that came in was, could the panelists recommend how to get the funding issue solved in my university?
Oh, that's not, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I had the support of my boss, and I was able to sell this to him just like Accelerant was able to sell it to me, and it's not that expensive, so it was easy for my boss to say that, you know, we're going to save money in the long run by purchasing this product, so it's kind of a no-brainer. So, you know, it was kind of an easy process for me, so I'm not really sure if you have resistance where you're working, how to overcome that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I experienced the same thing. Because I am the budget manager and also in charge of accounting services, and I have some funky responsibilities in here, one being copier replacement. So I think I was able to offer up some substitutions. Let's not do this, let's do that.
Okay.
So, because I do know how the budget is, what it's built on, so I could, we're going to have some savings here, so let's do that. So it wasn't a hard sell either, so unfortunately.
You know, there was another question that came in about somebody said that their general ledger system took a little bit over a year to implement, and I guess that's sort of the baseline in their mind. So their question was, why does the system go in so easily and quickly, given that my general ledger system took 12 months?
Well, this isn't a general ledger system. You're not setting up an account structure. All the information is already set up in your current general ledger system. You're just extracting that information via, an Excel file, and giving that information to BudgetPack, to Accelerant, to set up for you. So it's not like all the information is already there, basically.
Right, and we're not doing transactions. We're just creating a budget.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough. Cheryl, this next question is for you, and we'll take just a couple more because we are at the top of the hour. With the high number of budget managers, Cheryl mentioned 110 budget managers, how did you streamline the process but still maintain a bottom-up approach? Do fewer people take on more of the work? Interesting question, Cheryl.
Do fewer people take on, can you repeat that a little bit, Larry?
Yeah, I think the point here that they're trying to make is with 110 budget managers, apparently doing a bottom-up approach. Right. How did you still manage to streamline the process with that many people involved? And this person thought he might have an answer by saying, well, maybe just fewer people were involved in the process. In actuality, you have the same number of more people involved in the process. So he's just wondering, how do you still get a bottom-up budget and streamline the process?
Well, that is the way that the system is set up, so that each manager has their access. They go in and do it. I believe that there's probably more people involved because we never let officers into it, or even provosts didn't see a lot of this stuff. So it is streamlined because the hierarchy goes so that their manager can see what they're doing but not necessarily do it. So all 110 of them are in there doing what they're doing, and it is streamlined. It works very well. So it's all built on a hierarchy.
And I think that helps.
Yeah.
Last question here, unless Geoff, you had anything to add to that.
No. I have a different, 40 people. It's a lot different experience than 110. Mm-hmm. A little easier.
Was Budget Pack an out-of-the-box solution, or was it configured to meet your organization needs?
Absolutely, and I think that it's going to, it gives us more than our general ledger system gives us in, to use my CFO's word, slicing and dicing some of the data because of the way that we've set up some of that, set up some of the structure. So Larry's right, it's both. It's out of the box, easy to use, but when we set it up, we can really customize it to what we need.
And I agree, and I'm sure that if you were to look at Cheryl's budget pack, you know, how it looks, it probably looks very different than mine.
Right, right.
I mean,
and it's all based on, yeah, it's all based on the chart of account structure that we set up in our accounting system.
Right.
Okay. Well, listen, we've actually gone a little bit over time here, and we haven't had a chance to get to everybody's questions. But just to wrap up, this is really the start of a dialogue with anybody who's listened today and heard anything that they found interesting, or you know, some folks might have some additional questions that they'd like to ask. So really kind of consider today to be the start of that dialogue. We will certainly be following up with people that did have questions that we did not have a chance to get to today. So what I'd like to do is certainly thank Cheryl and Geoff, first of all, for taking the time to share their experience and their stories with everybody today. We certainly appreciate it, and I know the people on the line appreciate it as well. And we would urge you to go to our website, Accelerant, XLERANT.com. We've got a lot of great information up there, including links to prior webinars and white papers and a number of college and university case studies. We certainly, again, look forward to following up with people today that have asked questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. So with that, once again, I will thank Cheryl and Geoff for their time, and thank everybody on the phone today.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye for now.